Chaos in the political world. Trump is reportedly in total panic after ex-Prince Andrew's arrest, and experts say this could have massive repercussions across the United States. Secrets, legal drama, and shocking developments are unfolding fast, and you cannot afford to miss a single detail. Watch till the end as we break down every twist, and subscribe now. This channel is your exclusive source for US-focused updates you won't see anywhere else. Something seismic just happened across the Atlantic, and the reverberations are being felt all the way inside the walls of the White House. On the morning of February 20th, 2026, British police arrived at Sandringham House in Norfolk, England, and did something that hadn't been done in nearly 400 years. They arrested a member of the British royal family. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, the man who was once known as Prince Andrew, the brother of King Charles III and the second son of the late Queen Elizabeth II, was taken into custody on suspicion of misconduct in public office. And just like that, the entire Epstein scandal exploded back onto the world stage with more force than ever before. Because here's the thing, this arrest didn't just shake the British monarchy to its core, it sent a very specific, very loud message to powerful men on this side of the Atlantic too. And Donald Trump's reaction? Well, it told you everything you needed to know. Let's back up for a moment and understand exactly how we got here. Because this story has layers that go far deeper than what most mainstream coverage is willing to dig into. Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted sex offender and financier who died under deeply suspicious circumstances in a Manhattan jail cell back in 2019, ran what prosecutors described as one of the most extensive child sex trafficking operations in modern history. He had an island, he had planes, he had a little black book stuffed with the names of some of the most powerful people on the planet. Politicians, billionaires, royals, celebrities. For years after his death, the files related to his case were locked away, hidden from public scrutiny, and the survivors who had suffered at his hands were left fighting for justice against a wall of silence and elite protection. Then, in late 2025, the dam broke. The US Department of Justice released millions of pages of documents tied to Epstein, and among the revelations buried inside those files was information that would prove explosive for Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. According to British investigators, the documents raised serious questions about whether Andrew had been sharing confidential government information with Epstein during the years he served as the United Kingdom's Special Representative for International Trade, a position he held until 2011. Think about what that means for a moment. This wasn't just a royal socializing with a known predator at fancy parties, which was already damning enough. This was a senior government official, potentially feeding sensitive trade intelligence to a man who was running a criminal empire built on the exploitation of young girls. Thames Valley Police confirmed that they had arrested a man in his 60s from Norfolk on suspicion of misconduct in public office, and searches were being carried out at addresses in both Norfolk and Berkshire. The world quickly confirmed what British media had already broken. The man was Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, on his 66th birthday. The optics of this moment cannot be overstated. Here was a man who had spent years hiding behind royal privilege, who had given that catastrophically ill-advised BBC interview where he claimed he couldn't sweat and didn't remember meeting Virginia Giuffre, a survivor who wrote in her posthumous memoir that Epstein and his associate Ghislaine Maxwell had trafficked her to Andrew and that he had sexually abused her. Andrew denied all of it. He eventually settled a civil lawsuit with Giuffre in 2022 for an undisclosed sum, a settlement that allowed him to avoid a trial, but which, in the eyes of many, spoke volumes. King Charles III had already stripped him of his royal titles in late 2025, forcing him out of his cottage on the grounds of Windsor Castle. Andrew had been living a diminished, increasingly isolated existence, stripped of his royal designation, living at a downsized property, largely abandoned by the institution that had once protected him. And then the police came. The image of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor being driven away from a Norfolk police station, no longer a prince, no longer protected by the crown, just another man in a car under investigation, was one of the most symbolically powerful moments in recent British history. Epstein's victims and their advocates wept. Survivor Maria Farmer released a statement saying that the day was just the beginning of accountability and justice, and called on all the dominoes of power and corruption to begin to fall. Another survivor, Marina Lacerda, went on CNN and said something that cut right to the heart of what so many people were feeling. She said it was insane how everyone else was taking action and that the United States was doing nothing. That contrast, Britain acting, America frozen, became the story within the story. Now let's talk about Donald Trump, because his response to Andrew's arrest was, in many ways, more revealing than anything else that happened that day. When reporters caught up with the president on Air Force One as he flew to Georgia, they asked him about the arrest. And Trump did something that has become almost reflexively predictable for him. He made it about himself. He called the arrest a shame. He said it was very sad, very bad for the royal family. He praised King Charles as fantastic. And then, almost in the same breath, he pivoted to declaring that he himself had been totally exonerated, that he had done nothing, and that Epstein had actually been against him, fighting him in the election. He claimed he had just learned this from the 3 million pages of documents that had been released. It was a masterclass in deflection. Every answer curving back toward his own innocence, his own victimhood, his own narrative, even as the world was watching another powerful man finally face the law. Let's be very clear about something. Trump is mentioned numerous times throughout the Epstein documents. He has not been publicly accused of any wrongdoing, and it is important to state that distinction clearly and fairly. But the optics of the President of the United States watching a foreign government arrest a man connected to Epstein and responding by immediately talking about his own exoneration, that tells you something about the pressure he must be feeling. Because if Trump truly had nothing to worry about, the natural response would simply be to say that justice is being served and leave it at that. Instead, he couldn't stop circling back to himself. Twice, he called the arrest a very sad thing. Twice. And then, almost as a tell, he brought up that King Charles, the man whose brother had just been arrested, was coming to visit the United States soon, as if the diplomatic relationship needed reassurance, as if he needed to remind everyone that he and the king were still friendly, even as the king's brother was being fingerprinted across town. The Democrats pounced immediately, and this time they had genuine public outrage on their side. Representative Melanie Stansbury of New Mexico posted a statement online that was simple, direct, and devastating. If a prince can be held accountable, so can a president. She didn't name Trump explicitly, but she didn't need to. Representative Suhas Subramanyam, a member of the Oversight Committee, praised British police for making the arrest and said that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor had evaded justice for too long. Representative Jake Auchincloss went on CNN and delivered what many considered the defining line of the news cycle. Great Britain is holding its powerful and privileged to account. The United States of America should do the same. These weren't just political shots. They were expressions of a genuine, growing fury that the machinery of American justice seems to have seized up when it comes to Epstein's associates on this side of the Atlantic. And here is where things get truly extraordinary, because even people who had been among Trump's most passionate defenders were starting to break ranks. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who had previously been one of the loudest voices in the MAGA movement and had only recently resigned from Congress, posted a scorching message comparing the United Kingdom's decisive action to America's paralysis. She pointed out that the UK had arrested Andrew because of the Epstein files, while the President of the United States had signed an executive order protecting a cancer-causing pesticide, and there had been 0 Epstein-related arrests or investigations in the United States since the files were released. She called it the current state of MAGA. That is not a small thing. When the people who were once the most devoted foot soldiers of your political movement start asking the same questions as your fiercest opponents, something has fundamentally shifted in the political landscape. The release of the Epstein files had been something Trump himself had actually championed, or at least had not opposed. There was a moment, earlier in his second term, where there seemed to be a genuine appetite within parts of the MAGA coalition to use the files as a weapon against their enemies, specifically against prominent Democrats whose names they hoped would appear. The Epstein Files Transparency Act had its advocates in Congress, and there had been hearings and press conferences on Capitol Hill where lawmakers stood in front of cameras and promised the American people that accountability was coming. But something happened on the way to accountability. The files came out, yes, but instead of producing the dramatic revelations about Democratic enemies that some had hoped for, the documents painted a picture of an interlocking elite network that crossed party lines, that involved people from every corner of wealth and power, and that pointed fingers in directions that were politically inconvenient for everyone, including, apparently, for people close to the current administration. What Andrew's arrest did was obliterate any remaining pretense that powerful people are untouchable. The British establishment, which is not exactly known for its willingness to devour its own, had looked at the evidence and decided that even a prince, even a man whose mother was the longest reigning monarch in British history, was not above the law. King Charles himself issued a statement expressing his deepest concern and declaring that the law must take its course. Think about the courage and the clarity that took. A king publicly supporting the investigation and potential prosecution of his own brother. That is an act of institutional integrity that the American political system right now seems utterly incapable of replicating. Survivors of Epstein's abuse have been watching all of this with a mixture of vindication and heartbreak. Virginia Giuffre, who was perhaps the most prominent face of the survivor movement, and whose allegations against Andrew were among the most detailed and devastating, died by suicide in 2025. She did not live to see this moment. Her posthumous memoir, in which she wrote about being trafficked to Andrew, had already been made public. And now, because of the documents she helped bring to light, because of the legal pressure she and other survivors maintained for years against impossible odds, a man who once stood among the most protected people on earth was sitting in a police station in Norfolk. Maria Farmer's tribute to Giuffre in the wake of the arrest was a reminder that behind every political headline, behind every breathless cable news segment about Trump's reaction or palace statements, there are real women who suffered real harm and who have fought their entire lives for a justice that remains frustratingly incomplete. The broader question that Andrew's arrest has forced onto the international stage is whether the United States will follow where the United Kingdom has led. The DOJ released the files. Congress pushed for them. But as of this moment, there have been no American arrests, no American indictments, no American investigations announced into the living members of Epstein's network. The justice system that managed to prosecute Trump's political opponents with what critics describe as unprecedented zeal has somehow found itself unable or unwilling to take the next step on Epstein. CNN's analysis piece noted that in America, accountability seems elusive. That's a diplomatic way of saying what many people are thinking in far more pointed terms. What Trump's panic, and let's call it what it is, because a man who is truly at peace with his record does not pivot to his own exoneration the moment someone else is arrested, What his panic reveals is that the Epstein files are not done doing their damage. 3 million pages of documents contain multitudes. The British investigation into Andrew is just one thread being pulled. Investigators in other European countries have also been looking at the network. Survivors continue to push. Lawmakers continue to call for more transparency. And every time a powerful person is actually held accountable somewhere in the world, the pressure on American authorities to do the same increases exponentially. There is a scene playing out in real time that feels almost Shakespearean in its dimensions. A disgraced former royal, stripped of his titles and his home, taken away on his birthday by police. A president on Air Force One, surrounded by aides, watching it unfold on his phone and scrambling to position himself as the victim of the very scandal that threatens to consume more of the elite world he has inhabited. Survivors who gave everything they had, including, in Virginia Giuffre's case, their life, to make sure this day would come. And a watching world asking, with increasing impatience, who is next? The answer to that question will define not just the legacy of the Epstein investigation, but the credibility of American democratic institutions in the years to come. Andrew's arrest proved something that many people had given up believing, that the powerful are not, in fact, untouchable, that doors which look permanently locked can be forced open if enough pressure is applied for long enough, that a woman who was trafficked as a teenager can, even from beyond the grave, change the course of history. And that when a president responds to all of that by immediately talking about his own exoneration, the rest of the world notices. It notices very, very clearly. The dominoes, as Maria Farmer said, are beginning to fall. The only question is how far they will travel before they stop.